Hello and welcome to Future Imperfect. I'm your host, Steve Megatron Phillips, and joining me in this endeavor into the great beyond of the final frontier is...
It is I, Mike the Birdman Dodd, your captain, but not the commander of this boat. That honor goes to Admiral Steve Phillips.
Yes.
So yes, we are back here on Future Imperfect, and in this episode of Future Imperfect, we're going to take a little bit of a break from giving you the hard facts about Star Trek, but kind of talk about things as we perceive them to be. So the opinions expressed in this episode are those of the participants and not necessarily those of the Geekcast Radio Network or thisweekingeek.net. Basically, there are things in this where Steve and I may agree and may disagree, and where you, the audience, may agree or disagree with us as we move forward. So I kind of see this as a charged episode, as you may think, because it is 2018. Things are changing in the world. Yes. It is the 21st century, and that means we are moving forward socially, politically, economically, technologically. The human race is at a crux point right now where literally we kind of stand at an interesting impasse in terms of where we want to take the future. Given the current administration in the United States, it's moving towards a more conservative view of the world, basically more private companies, stuff like that, as far as I understand it. Now, I am Canadian. I may get some things wrong here, but from what I see, from what I get from the news and being involved in the news business myself, and I know someone out there is shouting fake news, but some of us reporters do check our sources. And that's not to say that's not necessarily a bad thing. Some conservative things are good, as is some liberal things. But when you look at through the lens of Star Trek is a very liberal world where you see everybody's treated equal. There is no war. There is no poverty.
Well, there's no war as far as within
the Federation.
The Federation.
Yeah.
But there is war in that universe.
Yeah, there is war in that universe, but when you look at the idealistic side of the Federation, basically here on Earth, there's no war, there's no famine, and the United Federation of Planets does have a council made up of different races, sort of like a more futuristic United Nations. And you kind of look at the current political situation on Earth with the United Nations, with the Canadian government, the U.S. government, presidents like Trump, and our Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, who could not be, I guess, if you really want to compare them, really, really, really different. Whereas Trudeau represents the Liberal Party and a liberal sort of mindset, and Trump represents the Republican, more conservative side of the coin.
I would kind of argue that he kind of beats to his own drum.
Yeah, he's a different Republican than I've ever seen before.
I wouldn't even categorize him. I think he ran as a Republican so he could run opposite of Hillary, honestly. I don't think that there was... I think that he's kind of a loose cannon.
It's different ideals.
Different ideals. I think he's got, like, the term of gender fluid. I think he's mental fluid, meaning that whatever suits him at that given point. And
that's different.
and so he's, because I'm conservative, I'm Christian, my mentalities are, there's two genders. Like, yeah, you can be, gay or lesbian. That's not anything. I don't believe in it, but I don't have any problem with anybody that is. Mm-hmm. I'm not going to push my ideals on someone else, to each their own. Like, if you're interested and you come to me, that's different. Like, but I'm not going to push my beliefs on someone else.
Yeah. Whereas someone like my... I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry. And like, as far as like Trump's concerned, I wouldn't consider him a conservative or a liberal. I would consider him just out there.
Yeah, so he's very much his own thing.
Yeah, I wouldn't see him as a true representation of an actual conservative.
Okay, yeah, just because that's something...
I think his VP is more that.
More Pence, yeah.
Yes.
And you look, and to bring this into the realm of Star Trek, that's a viewpoint in the future you don't necessarily see. And you kind of wonder, because as we move forward in the future, you do see people want that Star Trek future, but you look at the average American, so to speak, and a lot of them are talking, and from what I understand, a good chunk of people still support Trump, though you have to wonder, will that mindset survive into the future? Is that just a thing that is a byproduct of our parents' generation and maybe parts of ours as you move towards the future and technology becomes a bigger part of our lives, and you look at the things that are more on the liberal mindset of things, like you talked about, LGBTQ, transgender rights, even societal equalities, like with men and women being equal in the workforce. That's something in Star Trek. It's just seen as a thing. Men and women serve aboard starships. There is no sex. They just are. You're a captain. You're a commander. You're a lieutenant.
Your
title.
As
your job. Yeah, exactly. You're seen as your title. And things are changing now because, like I said,
and honestly, I kind of agree with you as far as like the work stuff's concerned. Like I don't see any logical reason why there hasn't been equality in that realm. Like,
yeah, it just doesn't make sense to me.
Anybody that's, everybody has the same. I mean, yeah, you have different gender parts, but the brain works the same.
Yeah, I mean, we're all the same mentally. I mean,
yeah,
no
we're all human.
Yeah, exactly. We're all people. And when you look at Star Trek, it has embraced that. And it seems to be after the Third World War happens and after the Vulcans come to Earth, we have this period of enlightenment. And obviously right now, everybody's fighting with each other. And I consider myself very liberal-minded, very pro-choice, very pro... What my mentality and mindset is, you can be whatever you choose to be as long as you're not hurting anybody. Love is love. And everybody deserves a chance.
And see, that mentality is fine, but the problem we have in America, whereas it's not prevalent anywhere else, is that they resort to violence to achieve or put downs to achieve the means.
Exactly,
and it's primarily, you're seeing more of it on the liberal side, and then you've got the ones that need to be like mental slapped with, I don't know, some kind of a mallet from a Looney Tunes commercial or cartoon that are on the far other side of the spectrum that need to be beaten,
Yeah, I mean, both sides have extremes and both sides have some utterly ridiculous arguments. And I kind of wonder, and that's basically the point of this episode, not to debate current politics, but to look at how we're evolving. Will we get there?
The funny thing that you bring this up is I actually watched a TNG episode this past week, and I've watched a number of them. They, kind of depending on how things go at the time. And it also depends on the writer. But TNG, I felt, had the best of both worlds as far as their leanings on decisions. Like there were instances where you got some liberalism on Picard's behalf, and you got some instances that were conservative, on Picard's behalf, based on his dealings with tribunals, trials, and people in the higher up of the Federation. And so, I watched an episode where it was Journey's End, where Wesley Crusher was coming back to the Enterprise only to leave with the Traveler. And then you had the forced relocation of, the Native Americans that were, the Indians that went to a particular planet that the Federation was giving to the Cardassians. And Picard didn't feel right with it, and yet was being forced to. And then things kind of played out on their own to where they kind of saved themselves. But and then there's other episodes where you've got like the Drumhead trials, where the lady was on a witch hunt for Picard and anybody else, using Worf and using everybody else to say that there was all these people out to get these people. And it was kind of our society is directly reflecting things we saw in TNG 30 years ago, which shows that there may still be hope.
Yeah, I mean, I'm hoping things change. I mean, Unfortunately, in the news recently, there was that guy out of Austin who that domestic terrorist bomber, and I can't but help think of other terrorists we've seen in Star Trek, homegrown terrorists. Obviously, the guy in Austin was nuts, but domestic terrorism sometimes has a basis in, well, they're taking our homes. What are we going to do? And you look at the situation with immigration in Star Trek, it's not so much a big deal, but you look at something like the Maquis, people being forced off their planets, stuff like that, and the given to the Cardassians, rebels and guerrillas kind of coming up. And it kind of paints Star Trek in a whole new light. Like you said, it reflects things that were happening 30 years ago. And one thing Star Trek seems to be very welcoming of is immigration. Like, you look at the integration of species on different ships. On every Star Trek series, we've seen an alien on board.
Well, there's been like TNG, Vulcans, you get Worf.
Yep.
The first, Klingon in the Federation, and then you get Data, the first, android, although it's somewhat retconned now with Discovery. But you get Data, who they're basically welcoming as just another, member of the crew, another actual person, which Picard fought numerous times for his rights. And then you get Voyager, where Janeway is fighting for the EMH's rights.
Another thing you could bring up, I guess, looking at this, is Chakotay was a member of the Maquis and reformed. So just because you were a bad guy once doesn't necessarily mean you'll stay a bad guy. I'm not saying all terrorists can be reformed, but, all people are people, right? I guess as long as it didn't kill anybody, I guess.
The thing about Voyager, though, is you had two kind of warring tribes of differences of opinions, but when it came down to it, they could work together.
Yeah, and I guess that...
put everything aside and grow collectively.
Maybe that's what I'm trying to say. So I kind of take back what I just said. When people, like you said, or people are put on opposite sides, sometimes they can work together for the greater good. So completely disregard what I said about the whole terrorist thing. But it's interesting to see how things are, like I said, evolving now, where we're having these conversations about immigration. We're having these conversations about equality. Like I said, we brought up sexuality and gender fluidity now. Whatever your opinions are on that, they are valid. And that's something about Star Trek that I think has always been a thing. If your opinions aren't hurting anybody, you'll be listened to. I mean, your opinions won't be shouted down by either side. Just as long as your opinion isn't, I guess, grossly offensive, you know what I mean?
Or if you're making a logical case.
Yeah, exactly.
I watched this Drumhead trials, and this lady, this admiral or ambassador, is just screaming at Picard in the most irate accusations that were just off the wall, and Picard just sitting there and just waiting for her to finish, and then he just calmly gives his retort, and then he stops while she explodes at him. And, if only everyone could handle every situation like Picard.
And I think at some point we're all going to have that conversation. I mean, when you look at the current military situation in the world right now, it's not a happy one. And the people that are in charge of the doomsday clock, whether you believe in that or not, have inched the clock closer to midnight. It's a very tense situation now with the threat of nuclear war being a realistic thing. But I firmly believe, I really think this. I think everybody can have that point where where we can sit down and have a conversation. Is Kim Jong-un nuts? Maybe. But he also probably doesn't want to die. So I'm kind of hoping there'll be a conversation at some point.
I think there's supposed to be.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing, though. Star Trek inspires hope. And the world right now is in a really interesting place where it can be really hope. Because you look, for example, and I don't want to start a pro or anti-gun argument right now. I'm using this as an example only. Recently, there was an anti-gun march. I think it was called March for Our Lives. Not too recently, like last weekend or something.
Yeah.
And hundreds of thousands of kids showed up. And you think about that, if people can listen and be informed, that says something. That gives me hope that the younger generation, not the generation that eats Tide Pods, because I'll admit there's some idiots in there too, that if they can organize and do that, maybe that says something. On the opposite side of that coin, some of the gun people have some valid points too, because there has to be an informed conversation. If this conversation happened in Star Trek, like you said, if we could all be like Picard, you've had your say, I will have my say, and in the middle, we'll find a compromise. And I think that's what Star Trek gives me hope for, is that we will have a conversation as a one people. Because right now, the problem is we're also divided over, are we conservative? Are we liberal? Are we male? Are we female? We don't have a conversation as people. We find a way to divide ourselves. If we can find that moment of, I'm going to call it clarity, maybe there is a hope for us to do something great. And I'm not saying it all has to be sunshine, roses, and hippiness, but I really think there's a genuine point for humanity to come out and do something wonderful, do something really, truly great. And I think with the leaders that are in the world right now, it is possible if we all talk and do something. I mean, our presidents, our prime ministers, our kings and queens, they promise a lot of things to us. And if it wasn't always about currying political favor or making power plays or cloak and dagger, I don't know, I guess this is my hope and my dream. If Star Trek has taught me anything, like I just finished saying, it gives me hope. If everyone could just sit down and shut up for 5 minutes and talk, maybe something truly great could come out of this. I mean, because right now, the planet's in trouble. Whether you believe it or not, be it man-made trouble, environmental, or God knows what else. I'm not saying aliens are coming, despite what Stephen Hawking might say. May he rest in peace. But Star Trek kind of gave us a blueprint for the future that through cooperation, conversation, technology, we can accomplish something amazing. And I don't think we've seen the greatest yet. Because people always talk about the civilizations in decline. Look at the stupidity on both sides of the argument, which you've said, be it liberal, conservative, or whatever.
There's just so much divisiveness in everything, whether it's social media, whether it's in the shows we watch, whether it's... Because, like, I mean, look at every show. There's a faction. There's always a line in the sand. There's always somebody conflicting with somebody. And so I think that partially a lot of this argumentativeness is built into us, into our DNA, based on what we watch.
Exactly. I mean, stuff like that can really divide us, but I don't think it has to. But I think the conversation's got to start somewhere. And I think I wish I knew more about him, but I know some of his quotes, and I always think of Martin Luther King. I think of JFK, for example, and I know those people probably couldn't be more different.
Well, I wouldn't say that they're different. I would say that they both strived for a lot of the same things. It's just that over time, and depending on who's retelling it, it's like the game Telephone. It gets distorted along the way by somebody else.
Yeah.
But I think that the actual intention from everybody is to have a peaceful conversation.
Yeah.
And not have this giant worldwide pissing contest with each other.
I mean, one of the great quotes, and I always think of Star Trek with this too, is ask not what you can do for your country, ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. And that brings up the economy. And obviously there's a huge wealth divide between poor, middle class, rich, the upper 1%, whatever. And should you be given what you work for? Absolutely. If you work hard, you should be rewarded for it, but not at the expense of other people, so to speak. And Star Trek's economy is nobody goes without. It's like, I don't know quite how it functions. Like, it looks like officers in Starfleet don't technically get paid in the way that we understand it. But they're given whatever they need, pretty much whatever they want. I'm not saying Picard has a mansion somewhere, but he might. He's got a vineyard. Riker's got a pretty nice setup. I mean, Deanna Troi looks like she lives pretty comfortable on Earth. So that's a problem that has to be solved, is the economic divide. And that's one thing that makes me wonder if we'll ever get to Star Trek. And it's a basic human problem. It comes down to greed. Mm-hmm. And people always bitch about, well, I don't want to give my tax dollars to so-and-so.
Well, that reminds me of another TNG episode where they found sleeper pods from the 20th century from these people that ended up going on the Enterprise D. And they had a couple of different people with different belief systems. And, the one guy's like, I was rich. I had myself locked up in this, so I could survive. And he's like, where's my bank account? And where's, this and that? And they're all like, we have no need of material possessions. We have no, money doesn't mean the same as what it means for you, and these guys were just like, what do you mean you don't have anything, and so it was entertaining to watch it, how we strive over frivolous crap, and then, in the grand scheme of things, it doesn't mean anything compared to being with your fellow man,
Yeah, and that kind of makes me wonder, that's probably going to be one of the biggest stumbling blocks to get towards the Star Trek future, is the basic economy, conquering human greed, so to speak. And like I said, hard work should be rewarded, absolutely, but not at the expense of someone else.
Well, I think we're already starting to head in that direction with the ownership of things,
mm-hmm.
because when you think about it, like, sales are down for just about everything. Toy sales, physical media sales, like, people just aren't spending the money on it anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that, one, it's a cost thing. Two, people can't afford it. And three, I think that people they just don't care to collect it anymore.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, because it just takes up space.
Because look at Picard. Even in the episode where the Ferengi give him the Stargazer, he has a single, basically like suitcase chest of some of his belongings on it, and that's it.
Yeah, because he can just replicate whatever he needs that's in the ship.
Mm-hmm.
The ship is, quote unquote, his. It's a shared space,
and it creates matter from nothing.
And whenever he's done with something, it gets recycled.
Yep.
And that's another thing too. That's another thing that Star Trek and us here on Earth right now are going to have to address: resource management, because the planet's running out of fossil fuels.
Well, funny you should say that. I was doing a little bit of digging, and I like to collect any type of technology news that I find. They've discovered that carbon nanotubes almost make Star Trek replicators real.
Yeah, we actually covered this on Twig a couple of weeks ago. The technology's probably about 20 years off, but if this could revolutionize how houses are built, you could 3D print houses, you could change how steel is manufactured. There's so much potential in this that industrial replicators on a large scale are realistically possible. And that's going to change how the job sector works too. And that's another thing too. Star Trek doesn't address so much, but it's definitely hinted around automation. Utopia Planitia probably has people working how to build starships, but I'm going to gather a large chunk of that's probably automated.
Oh, I would definitely think so.
Yeah, and with automation comes the loss of human jobs, but that also means there'll have to be smarter engineers to help design things for the future. But that also means the common jobs will be filled as well. So once again, looking at the Star Trek world economy, people will be able to pursue whatever they want, whether they want to be an artist, whether they want to be a writer, or if they're just happy doing your own thing. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
There's no penalty for that. And I kind of hope that's the way it happens, because one belief I've always held as a child is that you should live to be more than a paycheck. I don't like that idea, and that's why I've chosen the entertainment business, because I like to entertain people. I like to consider what we do, you and I, Steve, infotainment. We give you information, but we entertain you at at the same time. And I hope over the course of the Geekcast Radio Network's life and This Week in Geeks' life that we've done that. And in Star Trek, we could do this. We would be entertainers, so to speak. The bards of old, ye old wandering minstrels, so to speak, in the world of Star Trek. And it would be okay. Because other things would take up that, or people who want to work will. Some people find fulfillment in being, for example, a janitor or a teacher, or I'm trying to think, what other jobs? Guy who fixes the shuttlecraft, stuff like that. You know what I mean? Or people just, for example, you could be a dad in Star Trek and no one's going to look at you sideways twice.
Mm-mm.
It just is. And I hope that's a society we can work towards. I'm not saying everyone's going to be sitting around playing on their iPods and money just rolls in. But once again, the economic problem is something we got to solve at some point. We'll figure that out. Technology, as I was kind of hinting at, is going to change how things work as well. As you mentioned, carbon nanotubes. We talk about nanomachines, machines that fight cancer, machines or medicines that help people live longer. That's a question that's going to have to come up sooner or later too. Is, let's say the average human lifespan increases to say 120 years, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's going to bring up a population question. How do we sustain the population we have that continues to grow by X amount of people per year? We're going to have to leave Earth sooner or later. And that means branching out into the solar system, be it going to Io, going to Mars, for example. There's even talk that the cloud tops on Venus have a habitable zone, stuff like that. There could even be like stuff beyond our wildest imaginations out there, but we got to get there first. And we're going to have to do that too. We can't be concentrating on Kim Kardashian's ass or what stupid thing did the president do today. It has to be a collective push as humanity.
Well,
because
it's like the drive to have the new spaceships that are flying into, the SpaceX ships that are going into space. And
yeah, Elon Musk and all that.
Yeah, I mean, you have to almost have somebody that's kind of a visionary, kind of pushing that stuff. And I was reading something the other day too that they've theorized a way to create warp drive.
Yeah, and that's something that the sciences are starting to pursue more, because I think more and more people are starting to take space colonization as a real thing. Plus asteroid mining. I know Elon Musk has talked about that before. I know Hawking, before he died, had said humanity has to get off this planet in the next 100 years. Otherwise, it's game over. And if you can't believe what was likely one of the smartest men ever to live, then who are you going to listen to?
I don't think that it's I don't think that it's going to be in the next 100 years. However, I do think that they need to get the show on the road if they're planning to go that direction.
Yeah. I mean, now is the time. I mean, we have the technology. People are working towards it. People want it. That would create a whole new sector of jobs, create so much more opportunities for mankind. Although, realistically, there's going to be casualties, but such is the cost of exploration. When people came over to North America the first time around, it wasn't easy. So going to Mars, going out to these planets isn't going to be easy, but thinking for the future of where the human race eventually has to go, I'm excited for the possibilities, despite all our differences that we have today. right here in 2018. I'm still hopeful. I do not think the world's going to end at the push of a nuclear button. I genuinely think we're going to get off this planet and we're going to see things. I really do. I really think we'll escape the solar system in the next couple of 100 years. It sucks that we won't be alive to see it.
Yeah, that's kind of the boat.
I mean, there's one sci-fi universe that makes me so sad that I'll never see. And it's not Star Trek, as cool as that would be. I always think to Mass Effect and how just one big discovery of the Promethean archive on Mars jumped technology ahead by like 1,000 years or whatever. There's a moment, there's somebody on this planet right now that holds such knowledge that could jump us ahead just by leaps and bounds. We just got to find this people or this team of people out there or give them the resources they need to jump us ahead. Because I don't believe anything's truly impossible. Like you talked about the warp drive. Is that possible? I think NASA said it is.
They said it is theoretically. The kind of interesting part is there was a quote from, funny enough, Captain Kirk. And I kind of cut the bottom half of his quote, and I used it for our placard for the USS Future Imperfect, our SFI chapter. And I thought that it was kind of fitting. It's there's no such thing as the unknown, only things temporarily hidden, temporarily not understood.
That's a great way to sum things up. I mean, it really is. Because we don't know what the future's going to hold. All we know is the here and right now. And we can accomplish great things. We have accomplished great things. Every nation on this planet has something to be proud of. And I think if we recognize that, we're going to make it to Star Trek one way or another. We're going to have phasers, photon torpedoes, and Tellrights? Probably not. But are we going to see wonders beyond imagination? Absolutely. If we can just stop and talk with each other, if we can, instead of raising a fist, shake a hand, offer a hug, or even just a listening ear when someone's angry or upset.
And it's kind of funny you bring this topic up. I kind of vaguely talked about a little bit of this on Future Imperfect, or not Future Imperfect, Altered Geek on Tuesday. We had an episode where, I mean, granted, I say we, I meant me. I talked about falling out of fandoms, but it was more so out of the fact that it's gotten so toxic. Being in any fandom, like it's it doesn't matter what you're into, there's always going to be toxic people kind of tagging along, but I was more so saying that I will no longer participate in the conversations when it goes that direction, because one, it's not worth the energy, and two, I'm not going to let somebody drag me down the same rat hole, and so that was kind of I would rather have a mutual conversation of, differences of opinion than have a full-blown argument and throwing shade, as it were, at each other.
Yeah, I mean, I'm very much the same way. I mean, for example, my Facebook page, for those of you that are friends of mine and are fans, it turns into quite the dumpster fire. But I never shut down either side, because each side deserves to be heard. Whether that side is right or wrong is not for me to determine. It's to engage the conversation. Does that conversation get ugly? Yes. Did this episode start out a little rough? Yes. But at the same time, whatever you have to say, we want to hear. We just don't want to get dragged into an argument. Like Captain Picard did, we'll listen and give you a measured response. Because as officers of the USS Future Imperfect, we have a duty to represent Starfleet in a certain way. And I think that kind of comes to representing the podcast in its own way too, to always engage in meaningful conversation. Don't feed the trolls, such as it were. But if you have a valid complaint or concern or a viewpoint, let's hear it. Because if you feel that passionately about something, then you clearly have something to say. And if you have something to say, maybe you'll listen, maybe you won't, but regardless, you'll be heard. And that's something that I've always wanted to encourage amongst everybody, is always be willing to listen. And with the placard on our ship, I think that sums it up quite nicely. To always, how did that go, Steve?
There's no such thing as the unknown. Only things temporarily hidden, temporarily not understood.
And I think that I think that kind of sums it up. The future is not known, is not understood, but I think we should remain hopeful for it. So I guess that kind of brings to a close to this rather interesting change of pace for Future Imperfect. Hopefully you guys have enjoyed this conversation over the course of the last half hour plus. Once again, we invite your questions, comments, and whatever you guys have to say. If you have a different view of the future, tell me how you think it's going to go. Do you think we're going to get the Star Trek? Do you think parts of it will make it there? Or do you think we'll end up like Battlestar Galactica or Mad Max or something? And Steve, if people wanted to participate with the show, how would they go about doing that?
Probably the best way would be to access it on the Twitters. They can either use @AlteredGeek or @FutureWarped for this show specifically, but @AlteredGeek is where it gets published from. There's also my Twitter @SCP21.
Yep, and you can find me @Birdman. I always engage with anybody who asks me on Twitter, as long as you're not a douchebag. But I always like hearing from people, and Star Trek is quickly becoming a new passion of mine. So hopefully you people will continue to feed this passion for the future that we will hopefully see at some point. Because I want my replicator not to build things. I want a food replicator because I'm a fat bastard.
I just want one just so that I don't have to go buy food.
But anyway, that's going to do it. That's going to do it for us here on the USS Future Imperfect. Hopefully you have enjoyed our show. Once again, we do welcome your participation in any form that it comes in. So for Future Imperfect, we have been
Steve Megatron Phillips.
And I have been your captain, Mike the Birdman Dodd, saying live long and prosper.